Gerund or infinitive? That is the question that I will attempt to answer for you guys in this video. So let's get started. Have a look at the following pairs of sentences. They look very much alike, yet they are very different when it comes to their grammatical formation and meaning. Let's have a look at the first pair. In sentence 1, he used to live in a small town. The person in question lived in a small town in the past. In sentence 2, however, he is used to living in a small town. Living in a small town is something that is very familiar to him, something that he is used to right now. In the second pair, there is also a small difference in formation, but there is also a huge difference in meaning. In the first sentence, the speaker says that he remembered in time that he needed to take his grandmother to the hospital somewhere in the past. In the second sentence of the pair, however, he remembers the whole event of taking his grandmother to the hospital. So he's like experiencing some sort of a flashback. In the last pair, both sentences are questions directed to a smoker. In the first sentence, the smoker is asked to stop doing something else in order to have a smoke outside, while in the second sentence, he is asked to stop the act of smoking. Maybe you might have noticed that both categories of sentences are formed in a different way. All first sentences use an infinitive, while the others use an ing form. This difference in formation of the verb form seems to change the meaning of a sentence dramatically, and in this video I will explain to you when you need to use an infinitive and when you need to use an ing form. This type of ing form that you see in these sentences is, by the way, called a gerund. Let's first have a closer look at what exactly a gerund is. It is a special type of ing form, namely one that actually behaves as a noun. In smoking is bad for you, for example, smoking is an ing form that seems to behave itself more as a noun rather than a verb. And the same goes for the ing form swimming in Jane's hobby is swimming. Now the thing is that a gerund can take up multiple roles in a sentence because it can function as a subject of a sentence, as the complement, which we call in Dutch naamwoordelijk deel van het naamwoordelijk gezegde, and it can also function as an object, which you call a leidend voorwerp. Now, since the gerund is a very specific ing form, it is definitely not like the other ing forms that we have seen before. It is, for example, very different from the ing form used when forming the present continuous. It is formed the same way, but in "you're smoking too much these days," the ing form is actually part of the verb and it does not function as a noun like you have with the gerund. The gerund is also not the same as an adjective ing form, such as in "there was a smoking cigarette end in the ashtray." Here your ing form is an adjective and not a noun, as is the case with the gerund. Now in English there often seems to be a lot of confusion over whether you need to use a gerund or an infinitive in specific sentences. And to be very honest with you, there's no easy way to decide this. Some people can actually hear or feel what they need to fill in, but learning a couple of basic rules on when to use a gerund and when to use an infinitive can already help you out a lot. Let's have a look at a couple of rules for using the gerund. You first of all can use it as a subject, such as in the example sentence, "swimming is my hobby." Secondly, there are a lot of verbs that are always followed by a gerund and not an infinitive. Good examples are avoid, enjoy, something like to miss. This list that I've given you guys is, however, not complete, but it lists the most common verbs, I would say. Now, important to note, there are, however, a couple of verbs that can be paired up with both an infinitive or a gerund. There is a slight difference in meaning, but it is hardly there. So for me, you can use them interchangeably. Examples of these verbs are, for example, love, like, hate, permit, recommend. Another remark, since the gerund is actually a noun, you can also combine it with a possessive adjective or another possessive form. For example, in "you're continuously being late," you have used the possessive adjective "your" to say that the being late actually belongs to you. You can use a possessive form because actually, as I've said before, your gerund functions as a noun. Now let's continue with the rules for the gerund. You can also use it after a preposition. And the gerund also often pairs up with certain expressions such as how about and there is no in the example sentences. Make sure you know as many of these expressions as you can. Now, important to know, one of the expressions that is listed under Rule 4 is to be used to, which we have already seen in the pairs of example sentences at the beginning of the video. To be used to is indeed followed by a gerund, but there is also something like the expression used to, and this one is something different. This you use to express a habit in the past, and it is actually followed by an infinitive. So have a look at these two sentences. When I was younger, I used to play banjo is actually a past habit, so you need to use it with an infinitive. But this sentence is very different from after a while she got used to being on her own, which refers to something that is familiar to you and it is paired up with a gerund. The last rule for using the gerund is that you can use it after the verbs need and want for a passive meaning. If you, for example, say your hair needs cutting, then you're actually saying that your hair needs to be cut. Now, on page 27 of your syllabus, you will find an exercise on the formation of the gerund. So what you need to do is put the verb in the correct form, and for now that is only the gerund, so no infinitives yet. And you also need to write down the number of the corresponding rule that applies here. Now that we have covered the gerund, we will have a look at when to use the infinitive. Note that you can use an infinitive in two different ways. You can use it with to, or you can use it without to. Let's first analyze the infinitive without to. A first rule is that you use this form after a modal auxiliary, such as can, or could, or must, or might. Now, I think you probably already do this instinctively, so I won't spend too much time on this rule. Secondly, the infinitive without to is often paired up with verbs such as make and see if they are followed by an object. For example, in I saw her come in, her is an object paired up with the verb to see, and that is why it is followed by an infinitive. Now, what I want to say is that I saw her coming in also exists, so this time with a gerund. However, there is a difference in meaning. The difference is that with the infinitive, you actually say that you witnessed the whole action, while with the gerund, you imply that you only witnessed the action in progress. Some sentences, however, require an infinitive with to, and this is, for example, the case after an adjective, as in she's happy to be here. And this is also the case with constructions such as to plus an adjective and adjective plus enough. These are also followed by an infinitive with to. Now, we've already seen a long list of verbs that are followed by a gerund, but there are, however, also a lot of verbs that are followed by an infinitive. Here again, I have included a list of the most common examples. Verbs such as to expect, to prepare, to manage, to offer, they are followed by an infinitive. Again, this list is not entirely complete. Also, again, keep in mind that some verbs can take up both a gerund and infinitive, such as love, like, hate, and regret. Now, you can also use an infinitive with to express a purpose or a goal, as in he went to England to learn English. To learn English is your infinitive and expresses the goal that the person in question wants to achieve. Now, some verbs, when paired up with an object, also take up an infinitive with to. In, for example, your parents want you to do your best. Want is followed by the object, you, and thus needs to be paired up with a to infinitive. Now, in the following pages of your syllabus, you will find a couple of exercises on the use of the gerund, to infinitive, and also the infinitive without to. So make sure that you prepare these exercises. Now, hopefully you now have a better understanding of when to use a gerund, when to use an infinitive. Of course, you don't have to know all the rules by heart, but you should be able to apply them in sentences. So practice by preparing lots of exercises. Good luck with those exercises, and I will see you next time.